Hi, I'm Phil Mershon, and you're listening to A Shark's Perspective.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. I am Kenneth Kinney, but friends call me Shark. I am a keynote speaker, a strategist, a shark diver, host of this show, and your chief shark officer. What are the events and the conferences and shows that you remember? So many are pretty generic, very vanilla in a sea of sameness. They mean well, have good intentions. Many have good experiences. Some have even decent experiences with decent speakers. But what are the ones with the moments that stand out to make an event feel extraordinary and one that you will remember? After all, there is an art and a science to it. Then what does it take to create memorable experiences that are unforgettable? Phil Mershon is the Director of Experience and the former Director of Events at Social Media Examiner, which produces the enormous social media conference known as Social Media Marketing World. He's a jazz saxophonist, a pastor, and the author of Unforgettable, the art and science of creating memorable experiences. And on this episode, we will discuss a book about experiential events, Baking with the Art and Science of Experience, Social Media Examiner and Social Media Marketing World, speakers who are go-givers and are part of an event to add value, networking and connection, experience killers, the best social media marketing world ever, trends with events and the authenticity of sustainability, being human-centric, Wichita to La Jolla, unforgettable songs and elephants, and 2 must-hear jazz performances, and a lot more. So let's tune into a director of experience who plays jazz with a director of sharks who's pretty jazzy on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Phil, welcome to A Shark's Perspective. Tell us in your own words a little bit about your background and your career to date.
Yeah, so people call me a Swiss Army knife because I have a lot of different blades at my arsenal that I love to use. I'm an author, I'm a speaker, I'm a musician, I'm a jazz saxophonist in particular. I'm a former pastor, I'm an ideator. I love creating connections for people, and the list could go on. It all started fresh out of college when everyone up to that point in my life, though I was a musician, they all said, Phil, you'd be a great computer programmer. So I was programming computers for Boeing and kind of bored with the job because there was very little people interaction. And then I went to this total quality management training. I saw a guy leading brainstorming exercises, and I said, I want to do that someday. I asked him how he did it, and his career path was not one that was attractive. It took him 30 years of being a pastor, having a heart attack, and the doctor saying, you can't be a pastor anymore, find something else to do. And so he discovered facilitating. And I said, well, that's not a very good career path. So I began though learning how to do it. I was doing it for a nonprofit and eventually did it for a large multinational company here in Wichita, Kansas, where I live. And that began the journey where people would go to trainings that I did and say, Phil, that's the best training event I've ever been to, or that's the best conference I've ever been to. And I'm like, okay, either your standards are really low or I'm doing something that I need to pay attention to. And that's what eventually, after running Social Media Marketing World for a decade and people kept saying best conference ever, I finally said along the way, okay, there's something here that I'm doing that I need to write down and I need to put into a book and talk about. And so that's kind of really fast overview of how I got to where I am. And I'm doing that today. I'm director of experience for Social Media Examiner, author of Unforgettable, and loving to talk to people like you about experiences.
Appreciate it. Well, so let's talk then a little bit about the book Unforgettable, the art and science of creating memorable experiences. Who was the book primarily written for? Is this for event planners? This is for marketers and salespeople, all brands? Where do you sort of view the audience in your own words?
So when I started writing the book, it's for people like you, Shark, people who are event owners, who are creating events, not necessarily planners, but planners can benefit. I figured a planner is going to get a few good ideas, but someone who's maybe creating their first event or they're scaling their event up and they know they want it to be a lot more experiential than what it's been. That was one group of people I wrote for. Another group were the corporate event planners out there who are managing events for lots of different managers within the company who aren't necessarily event organizers, but they have this area of knowledge they need to create an event around. And those events tend to end up being boring. In the association world, the same thing can be true. There's lots of things that happen in the name of being a member of the association, and those meetings can end up being boring. So those were three different groups that I was writing for. As I'm going and speaking places, there are people responding to the message of the book that were totally unintended. People in the hospitality industry, medical offices, people who are, in or museums and amusement parks are saying, "Hey, we're creating experiences, and I resonate with some of the things that you're saying here." So I think the potential audience is huge. I wrote it from the perspective of an event organizer, so I think you'll get the most benefit from the book if that's what you do. But even network marketers are like saying, "Hey, we do parties, we're doing events all year long. We need this."
Well, I hate the word triggered, but this can trigger some very positive things for people just thinking about customer experience as much as it can for event experience. And that's what I loved about it. And I love you approached it from an art versus science perspective as well. How much for you do you think basically comes down to events being the art versus science? Which one stands out more now that you look back at your decades of experience? How much of it was the gut feeling reaction that you get out of an event? Because to your point that you mentioned in the book, I've been thinking about this a lot since reading it. I very rarely can remember I remember going to the events. I remember maybe even sitting in the chair, but most of them are very vanilla.
Yeah. To answer the question on art versus science, I think you need to start with the science. Just most like the way you learn to play an instrument or the way you learn to bake. That's a core analogy in the book. It's a smart way to learn how to bake from a recipe. Not everyone does. Like the Italian mother might teach her son or daughter how to make spaghetti just from scratch by taste. That is a way to learn. I remember I developed this whole model of how to train people in the trading business, financial trading. And I presented it to some managers. And as soon as I was done, one of them said, "Well, this is a bunch of hogwash. I take my kids to the top of a 1 diamond or 2 diamond slope, and I say, I'll meet you at the bottom." And they've never skied before. He said, "That's how I want traders to learn how to trade, is just by doing it." So there are different models, but I think in general, people want to learn from the science, like, how did these ingredients really go together? What's going to make sense? How does color affect things? But then the art is built on top of that. As a musician, I have to learn my scales before I can create great music. Otherwise, it's just going to be a bunch of nonsense sounding stuff. So I don't know percentage wise. I think it's a before, but then it's iterative. You're going back and forth, but you want to get to the place where you're competent enough with what you know that you can be artistic and create those moments that will stand out, that when you think back to, event X, there's an experience that reminds you of that event. And that experience reminds you maybe of a conversation or something that you learned. I like to call those memory hooks.
There were way too many references for me in here to bread. I was getting hungry as I was reading through the analogies. But when I think through events, even that I participated in a few that were year over year, I'm kind of curious, when you think of somebody that was helping run social media marketing world for so many years, which is a huge, well-known conference, how much of it did you try to build on the experience year over year? I mean, do you remember the one that happened in 2017 versus the one that was kind of boring in 20 whatever? I mean, I'm making the years up, but it's hard sometimes for people to create a unique experience, but then to keep that sustainably unique, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, I think, there's this temptation to do rinse and repeat when something works. And sometimes that makes sense. Like, you've got to count the cost on, does it make sense to reinvent this? We have a venue that we love going to for one of our parties, that it just works. It's the right size and it has things that people love, and it makes it easy for us to plan it again. And we can refresh it in certain ways, but it makes our life easier so that we can focus on things that really do need to be overhauled. And so you don't reinvent all the things every year because that becomes very expensive. You have to buy all new graphics. You have to buy, pay people to design different things. I think you're looking at what are the places that are going to be most strategic, and also knowing your audience. Like, I know when someone's coming to social media marketing world, there's a high likelihood this is their first time. It could be 70% of them, it's their first time, but it's definitely over 50% who have never been to the event before. So they don't know what we did in the past. But people who are coming back, they want it to feel fresh. They want it to feel exciting, like there's some new things going on. So I'm looking at what are those wrinkles, those surprises, and those don't have to be super expensive, but they're impactful, that are making people say, okay, they did that new. I wonder what else is going to be new. And you're trying to draw them in and engage them through the experience.
Yeah, that's a very fair point, because I was looking at it through the lens of now having jumped a lot heavier into being a professional speaker. I have been invited back to events. And so I sometimes think about it through the lens of what was it like last year versus this year? And do you need to one up yourself each year to make it better? But to your point, a lot of people, they just want a great experience. They maybe don't remember what it was 3 years in a row, or so on and so forth. So, but the most important thing, I think you said that a lot of things that we often forget about whenever we're talking about customer experience that events teaches you really quickly, is you got to look at cost, because that money comes up front and it's quick and it's early. So
now I will say this about speakers. That's the first thing we'll get feedback on, is if a speaker repeats their content. So even if it's 75% new content, but they tell these couple of killer stories that they just use all the time, it feels to them like it's the same talk. And we can have some of the same speakers in the lineup, and even if their subject is different, people don't notice. It's like, yeah, the same people speaking all the time. So we were very intentional about refreshing the lineup and making sure it's mostly new faces. Some people are just the right person because their expertise is, there's no one that compares with them. And so you have to say yes. But I do think as a speaker, refreshing your content is super important. Unless it's 100% new people or even 90% new people, then you're willing to take the hit there.
Well, you do a good job of talking about how much speakers have such a huge impact on an event. Talk a little bit, if you will, about the characteristics that you look for in speakers that help create a great event.
I would use the phrase go giver. So if a speaker is a go giver, they're showing up and they're present at the event, not just for their 1 hour session, but they spend at least a day hanging out.
I want to stop and applaud that, because that's a conversation I've had multiple times this week. It's very easy for people to fly in, fly out. It's horrible not to be part of the community.
Yeah, I mean, there are events where that makes sense, and there are people, if your name's Barack Obama, and you've got Secret Service around you, you're not going to hang out at the event. All right, I get it, but most speakers don't have that. And so I look for people who are adding value to the event. And so people come to an event in person versus online because they want that chance to hang out with you, Shark, or whoever the speaker might be. And if they can't find you anywhere, like, you come in, you drop your knowledge, and you immediately disappear to a green room, and you just hang in the green room all day, or even worse, you go back to your hotel and you're never there, unless you're sick, which that's a different story, which that has happened a couple times over the years, where someone has to literally disappear because they don't have the energy. But if you've got the energy, stay for a day. If you can, stay for the whole event. We talked about our friend Mark Schaefer before this, and I love Mark. Like, when he comes to our event, he's there. He's planning events to bring people at the event together. He's just hanging out in what we call a networking plaza and just sits at a table, and he'll talk to whoever comes up to him through the whole event. Many of them will have an hour of Q&A after their session, where they're just standing in the hall until the line disappears. They'll just keep answering questions. That's what a go-giver looks like. They're saying, what else can I do? And if you've got someone with that kind of mentality, then they're coming in to add value, and they want to make the event better. And I think that's what makes all of us better, is if you've got partners You're providing a stage for these people. You're providing an opportunity for them to serve the audience. And if they come in with that attitude, as opposed to, I'm the next greatest thing since sliced bread, then, that comes across to the audience, and they can tell very quickly, okay, this person, they just came to drop their knowledge and leave. And, that I didn't get that much from it.
Well, most events are not social media marketing world or inbound or Dreamforce. Not all of them have big names and huge budgets. So they really do depend on speakers to help develop and build this community and be part of it and be present. And that's easier said than done. But I think sometimes, and I probably didn't realize it as well until I started working some events as well, how much you're worried about making certain that the audience feels connected to the speakers. And that's part of it. Sometimes just walking around the expo hall and saying hello to people. And it's little things like that. I love, though, to kind of dive into this a little bit deeper. You also talked about the idea of networking. Just adding the word networking to an agenda does not guarantee it'll happen. So how do you go about developing a more extrovert and introvert friendly event for people so they can be part of that networking?
Yeah. And I think depending on your industry, you may not even want to use the word networking if it has baggage. Like we've started using the word connecting and connections more than networking. But I think using the word is good. It's not bad because it does predispose people to realize, okay, this is a networking break. But if there's nothing that's happening during that break where you can network, like it's a 10-minute break, let's not call it a networking break. That's really just a break.
Bathroom and coffee is not a network.
There's not time to pause and network. But if it's a 30-minute break, okay, now I can have a conversation or two. So some things that you can do. I think starting early is very important. Use the word community. We're trying to build a community. And, whether your event is for an existing community or you're creating a community around the event, which both are valid models, just depends on your business and what you're doing. Start early, as early as you can. Doesn't need to be more than 60 days out, because I don't think people are thinking about your event much more than 60 days out. Even if they bought their ticket a year in advance, they're not really starting to make their plans until about 60 days out. And then they're starting to get curious. Okay, what's on the agenda? Who can I make plans with? Who else is going among my friends? Can I make some new friends? Who are the speakers going to be? So have some kind of online way, whether that's as simple as a Facebook group or you've got your own community that you've built on a third-party app. If you have a mobile app, I think that's a really smart thing to release in advance. Some mobile apps allow you to build community. Others, it's just the one-to-one connections. But networking works better in person if it started online. That is very strongly, in my opinion. That's not the only way. Some people can walk into a room and they won't know a stranger. That's not the majority. There's at least 50% of the people coming to your event are introverted and reserved when they're in a new social setting. We've gone so far as to having workshops for introverts on how do you network. And the greatest benefit from that is not the skills we taught them, but now all of a sudden they've got 3 new friends. So anything you can do to help people make 3 connections, even 2 connections. So another thing we'll do when people arrive on site is we've got a team that their primary job is to help people connect. We call them the connections crew. We've had paid ambassadors, but those paid ambassadors created the path for a team of volunteers to come who just love connecting people. Like that is their God-given gift. They just love to connect people to other people. And they'll tell you that. It's like, oh, I get a thrill out of it. The reward for me is watching 2 people meet each other and become best friends. You don't need to pay me when I see that happen. If I find, 5 or 10 people like that and set them loose within the event, I describe those people like yeast in a loaf of bread. If I have the right number of those people working the event, they'll spread out and they'll start getting people connected to each other. And that's where magic happens. Those conversations sometimes are the things that I remember about events. It's not what did I learn in session X? It's who did I meet and what did we talk about? And did I follow up with them? And now they're an ally. Those are the things that I remember more than anything.
It's a fantastic point. Talk a little bit about what you've seen in your experience that are really experience killers. It's a little bit of a
Yeah,
dark laugh.
no, it's a really funny question because it's a question that I love to ask others when I'm interviewing them is like, how would you kill an event? Um, so here's one. You're speaking at an event and you've got a deck of 40 slides for a 30-minute session, and every slide is full of dense content. And people's eyes start to glaze over, and you're speaking in a very monotone voice. So, like, the energy's not there. Or you walk into a networking party and there's not any music, or it's the wrong music. Wrong music could actually be worse than no music. But you walk into this room, there's not very many people there, and there's nothing that's inviting about the room. There's no music. It's not very colorful. They called it a networking party, but maybe you got there just when it's starting, so it really hasn't started yet. That can kill it. Like, I'll leave a situation like that because it feels so awkward. So I think those are a couple. If there are long lines and they don't have a plan for how to activate people within the line and make that a bit more of an enjoyable experience, at least not making it a bad experience. Long lines can kill an event in a heartbeat, or speakers who just aren't a good fit. You know, they're not, they are exciting, they're energized, they've got good slides, but they're at the wrong event. Like, they're speaking on a topic that no one cares about, or they're too advanced or too basic for the people that are in the room. That also will turn people off in a heartbeat. There's so many things, but there's a few for you.
Yeah, no, and I think it's great. One of the things I'm sure you're probably thinking about a lot when you're helping coordinate these now and deliver an experience to people at social media marketing world is thinking about how one speaker and another speaker fit in a schedule as well. Because if you got two people in the morning that are higher energy, and then you're closing out the afternoon after they've had a lot of carbs and they're put you to sleep speakers, like it'll kill the experience. You kind of have to figure out that ebb and flow with people as well. The other ones I know you mentioned and you talk about is no coffee, which is a horrible thing for me. Bad Wi-Fi. It's horrible at almost every Vegas casino. Not enough power chargers now. I used to complain that everybody else was sitting by the side of the wall, but now I'm the worst at having my own battery pack backup. But I agree with all of those. I think sometimes we hear a lot of the times the expression with maybe the killers is not the right word, but the ones that really turn off an event. But I think people don't nearly take enough look at the details that you talk about in the book, at really looking at the details. These start adding up really quickly to destroy an event. It doesn't take a bad meal. It's not just the bad meal or the bad speaker. It's the collection of them, and they add up so quickly.
Yeah, and I would add something to that, Shark. That is, we all can recognize a bad event, you know, something that's really terrible, and we all could probably tell those stories. And we probably can also remember a couple of events that were incredibly good, that stand the test of time. It's like, man, that was maybe my favorite. Killer is not the word that I would use, because I think what the worst is are the silent killers, the things that just make the event feel meh. And it's not something that you forget, or that you would wish you could forget about, or it's not something you wish you could never forget. It's instead, it's those things in the middle that are just kind of boring and just there, and you're not moved by it, you're not changed by it, you kind of are glad you're there. Those are the ones that to me are the worst. Those are the ones that have the potential of becoming good. The ones that are terrible, really, we should just kill them. You put them to rest and let's move on. I don't think we can rescue those.
And to your point, especially with social media marketing world, I mean, if people in social media aren't talking about it, then you've got to one. You almost want it to super succeed. You don't want it to fail, but at least they're talking about it then. If they're just you don't see a lot of conversation going on. So I'm curious, in all of the experiences you've had from your events, was there any one particular year at social media marketing world that was the best in your eyes? Why was it the best in your judgment?
Every year has had things about it that I loved. So I don't know if there was a best. Yeah, because I could talk about the year that we were in 2020. We were 4 days before the world shut down, and we were concerned about, you know, is the pandemic going to hit the event? And yet we had an amazing event. I could talk about 2019, a year that I had to leave because my father passed away. So I had to go home for a funeral. And yet Mark Schaefer knocked it out of the park with a closing keynote where we had an indoor fireworks show, which was one of those amazing things that you can see online. There were the years that we went to the Midway for a party. But content wise, I think we're having better and better content and conversations now, even post pandemic, when numbers are, arguably not the same as they were pre-pandemic because people just aren't going out as much. They're being more selective about where they go with their conference dollars. But we're seeing such deeper, richer conversations. Like literally, we had a speaker this year who was the last session of the day, the last day, right before the closing keynote. And he had people standing in line after his session for an hour and a half, missing that keynote because that's how engaged he was with the audience. And so, it's hard for me to say there's one that was better than another. Personally, there was one year where I went in with 3 goals. I think this was 2017 or 18. I went in with 3 goals that I wanted to achieve during the conference, and they all happened before the conference started. So for me, that was a personal highlight. It's like, okay, I was not expecting any of my goals to be met. I don't even go into an event usually with them, but we started with an activity where we asked everyone to write down, what your goal is and share it with somebody. And I was kind of blown away to watch all 3 of those things, fulfill themselves within a matter of a couple of hours of that meeting. So
when you think about where we're going with events, one of the things over the last few years is you start seeing a lot of things that are buzzwordy, make up a new word, sustainable. I hear about things like sustainable, which as a diver, somebody, it's extremely important. And then I think about, as much as this becomes part of the packaging with what kind of straws you use or, what your footprint is, I think about the 2,000 people that got on a plane and flew somewhere. And it made me think a little bit when I started thinking through that lens with where we're going with what's next. How do you start thinking about designing out an experience that's not just a trend?
That's a great question. So I do think we have to consider, where is technology going to play a role in the future of events? Like the carbon footprint that we take up when 2,000 people get on a plane or a car or a train going to an event is something we hadn't thought about that much 5 years ago. And now we're thinking about it more carefully. We're thinking about, when we create an expo hall and we're laying down $20,000 worth of carpet on that expo hall and find out that carpet's being thrown away, then you start to ask yourself, well, what are we doing here? That's a lot of waste for a 3-day event. So you start, challenging assumptions that we have to have carpet. Do we have to do this event in person? Could we do it online? This isn't here today, but VR could change the way that we do events one day. I've got friends in the industry who say 100% that's happening. That's where we're going. I don't know. I think people still want to meet one face to face. They still want to touch each other. I think, we're going to see more smaller events happening than necessarily the huge events. I think that's where things will go. But the way that we keep it from just becoming a trend and jumping on the latest bandwagon is making it human centric. So we want to focus on the experience of people. What are they really looking for? And if we have their best interest in mind, we're looking at the journey that they're going on through the experience, what the needs are, what their emotional journey is, how we can best serve them. And we're never going to be on a trend because it's always about people. And if we're people connecting with people, we're creating experiences for people, then the trends aren't going to matter so much. It's really funny, Shark. I wrote this event starting 6 years ago. And when I started it, I was not aware of any books out there that talk about event experience the way that I'm writing about it. I was on a call earlier today. This is in August, with a group from Google that is leading the charge on basically exploring all the stuff that I've written about in the book and more, and doing like academic research and, putting money behind projects, trying to understand all these things. And I was excited. I was a kid in the candy store saying, what why didn't I know about this sooner? Well, it's only a year old project, so that's why I didn't know about it sooner. But, experience design is like the buzzword right now. Experience design is not new, but the things that we're thinking about in experience design are new. But when it's focused on people and what's best for people and not just what's new and artsy or novel, but some of the things they're going to do are like, okay, that's interesting. We'll see how that goes. But it's all in the spirit of experimenting and saying what's going to enhance this experience for people and make it memorable. And I don't think their goal is necessarily being memorable as much as it is having an emotional impact on people, making people feel safe, helping them feel connected to a community, which will all lead toward the transformational kind of conversations and learning that we are desiring.
Yeah, this wasn't, and I didn't mean to make this, or I don't know if it's sustainability was the best example, but I noticed this a few years ago where people were starting to use that as marketing jargon and
yeah.
I've been noticing some of the ways with people, the way they present. You start seeing how everybody starts to flock that way. And so nobody's got a crystal ball, with the exception of, you just made a fantastic point that now that I think more and more about it, although I probably, if I'd been there, I would have recognized and loved the fireworks show. To what you had mentioned earlier, probably would have loved talking to you or any of the other people there at the place that much more. That's what for me has always been the experiential part, is just being able to network within that community. And again, it shows the importance of the platform and the experience you've created. So, Phil, there aren't a lot of these in Wichita, in Kansas, where you are, but what is your favorite kind of shark and why? You're on a shark's perspective.
Oh my.
You have any
I
experience
don't
going down to
know.
La Jolla outside of San Diego and seeing any sharks?
Yeah. I mean, so I don't think it's my favorite, but it's the one that I have the most relationship with, and that's the great white, because I will never forget reading Jaws for the first time, driving from Kansas to Iowa in the summer, and the story made me sick to my stomach so much that I threw up when I got to the scene, where the shark is tearing up the body. And then knowing of people, I didn't know any of the people who got bit by them out there off La Jolla, off of Torrey Pines there in San Diego, that, people who were out there swimming for triathlons and stuff. So we lived in Orlando for a while. And so went out to my wife grew up in North Florida in Gainesville. So went over to St. Augustine. And so we'd see them out there on the pier. I think they're the tiger.
You see a lot more
Sharks,
bull
probably.
sharks in Volusia County, up in that
Yeah.
area.
Yeah.
Well, luckily, you see a lot more leopard sharks in La Jolla than almost anything that in Sixkill. The waters are about 50 degrees cooler in California. That's a better place for great whites. But
Yeah.
anyway, well, Phil, it's that special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions you're going to be asked today?
Let's go for it. I'm ready.
All right. You wrote the book Unforgettable, but let's talk about a different kind of unforgettable. Do you like better Nat King Cole's original Unforgettable, or, which should be your walkout music, by the way,
Yeah.
or the virtual duet remake that was with his daughter, Natalie Cole?
Yeah.
Which of the two?
Definitely the digital remake
Okay.
with father daughter. Yeah. 100%.
Why do you say that?
Just the family connection.
Yeah,
It just feels a little fresher too, a little more
true.
my generation. Yeah, that's the version. I've actually been trying to find a new version of it that I like, and I haven't found one yet. Like there hasn't been another remake that has a more modern vibe to it that I think's cool.
Well,
Unless you,
I think Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga did one that was okay.
yeah,
So, and we lost Tony too. So, all right.
we lost
Number
Tony.
2 on the cover is an elephant. So, we're going to talk about unforgettable elephants.
All right.
Dumbo or Babar?
Oh boy. I'd have to go with Dumbo.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just a classic story.
Yeah, agreed. All right. Number 3. I think you'll appreciate this one. You like jazz saxophone? I remember reading about Kenny G or Kirk Whalum.
Kirk Whalum every day of the week.
Thank you. And one, I know Kirk Whalum, when I was on TV and radio, I had him on both my TV show and my radio show years ago.
Oh,
He's based in Memphis and has been
yeah.
the artist in residence for years. And he played the most well-known jazz solo on a album in history, Whitney Houston, "I Will Always Love You."
That was him. I
That
don't
was
think I
Kirk
knew that.
Whalum. Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
wow.
he's amazing.
I've met him a couple times. Just the gentlest soul you
Oh
can
my Lord, yeah,
imagine. I wish I could hang out with him.
very,
That's like
very,
probably
very,
on
very
my,
involved in his church. Yeah.
yeah, he's basically a pastor. His gospel according to jazz albums are among my favorite. So yeah.
Do you have any jazz saxophones around?
Yeah, I happen to have one.
Play us a note or
Got it.
two.
A note or two. All right.
Oh, what an honor. I really appreciate it. That was amazing. I could play a kazoo and that's about it now. So I've let my piano skills go. This is going to be really hard to follow up then. So number 4, little social media marketing world type question. If you were going to post a video of that, would you rather post it on TikTok or Instagram Reels?
Instagram Reels.
Why so?
Mostly because I've tried it. I tried it at Christmas last year, and the people following me and commenting on it on TikTok were not my people. We'll just leave it there.
Interesting. And you know what's funny too is I have not heard anything about threads in at least like 3 weeks now. So it's been kind of nice to not even hear any more about Instagram. Maybe they'll just kind of go back to some of their roots anyway. All right, number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Ooh, cornbread.
Okay, good man. All right, so
With butter and honey, of course.
Oh, of course. So Phil, where can people find out more about you, get a copy of this book, look at the conference and more?
Yeah. So you can find out about me at philmershon.com. All of my social links are there on the top of the page. You can buy the book directly from me, but I'd encourage you to go buy it at your favorite online bookstore. As of right now, it's not available in any in-person bookstores, except if you live in Wichita, Kansas. You can go to Watermark Books. And then social media marketing world, go to socialmediaexaminer.com and you'll see a place to click to find out more information once you get there. I'm going to do one more thing for you. So one of the things I like to do is create an experience. So I played Unforgettable because you talked about it, but a lot of times I will create an experience based on the interview that we've just had. And this is going to be my take on a shark's perspective.
Okay. God bless you. That was amazing. Thank you so much for doing that.
No.
That's fantastic. Phil, thank you so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So there was my conversation with Phil Mershon, the Director of Experience and the former Director of Events at Social Media Examiner, which produces the enormous social media conference known as Social Media Marketing World. He's a jazz saxophonist, a former pastor, and the author of Unforgettable, The Art and Science of Creating Memorable Experiences. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, he gave some great advice to speakers, and he's seen a lot of them at such a big conference. Refreshing the lineup is often worth a lot, but he is looking for what he calls go-givers. He went on to elaborate how speakers play such an important role at events, and I see this. Too many fly in and out without being part of the show, and that should include time off the stage in most instances. Phil looks for people who add to the experience of an event, not just their time on stage. So stay around for a bit and be in the moment of the show, and more speakers need to refresh their content and not look the same year over year over year. Speakers have a big impact on an event. Let's maximize that and add to events. Look what Phil did even as a guest on my show. He broke out the saxophone and played to make the experience better. Second, Phil gave great advice on what many call networking breaks. In his conference, they now call it connecting, but try to actually help facilitate connections. Bathroom and coffee is not a networking break. He says to help facilitate is building a community as early as you can and as early as makes sense. As many people know, the value doesn't always come from the person on stage, but the new connection and conversations you have beyond the stage. Third, I think Phil's most important discussion point is when we started talking about trends. There's so much that people are trying to do with fireworks and packaging and plastic straws and buzzwords and the hottest trends of the moment. However, what matters more is being human-centric and keeping focused on that connection with the attendees. That's something they long for. Too many shows forget that when the focus goes elsewhere. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time, and I am so thankful to everyone who listens. Let's create an amazing experience today and listen to some jazz while doing it. Please join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.